New on Curiosity Stream.
I'm James Burke. I'm going to take you on a journey through time.
James Burke's visionary series returns, reimagined for our time.
Now, this is all uncharted territory.
The Washington Post hails Burke as one of the most intriguing minds in the Western world. The New York Times raves he careens from one great moment in history to another.
Where do we want to go from here?
Experience all new connections.
So what's the next connection?
With monthly, annual, and bundled plans, find the one that works for you at CuriosityStream.com.
United Nations forces in Korea, including units of the Greek army, bear the full brunt of the long-awaited spring offensive of the Chinese Communist armies. Once more, civilians struggle for survival as thousands, abandoning their homes, again trudge southwards. Behind the lines, Seoul once again becomes a fortress, while the big guns keep the enemy at bay.
My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? I am your host, Richard Dix. This is your first time listening to the podcast. Welcome, have a seat, sit down, get comfortable. I'd like to find out how things happen here 7 days a week. You can always find all the extras over at htthappen.com. Of course, the socials are at htthappen. Not much happening over there, but they are still there for your enjoyment and appreciation. We're going to talk about, of course, the Korean War this week. It is in our 40s to 70s theme, which we've been working for about a month and some change now. Maybe, we've really been digging in to it, and I think we are better off for it, I must say. This is, I've learned so much in this time, and it's easier. All the episodes to me kind of just flow together a lot easier than they were when we were doing it before. And I think we even talked about what the next theme might be. I mentioned it, I think, at the end of one of the last episodes, and I'm still thinking about doing it, which is like what are the most influential or important moments of the 20th century, and just kind of do like a top 10 and kind of just run that down for a couple months. But we're not there yet. We still have a few more months of the 40s to 70s. We're going to get all the way. We're not going to go into the mid 70s. I don't think we're going to stop like 72, 73, because I always think that like with decades. The first couple years of any decade are just the end of the last decade. You know what I mean? In comparison, like we can easily say that 2013, right, is much more like 2010 than 2019 is. So I think that you can cover up until 73. 73 is probably still a lot more like the 60s, obviously, than 1979 is you're almost in the 80s. It's just a little bit different. So we've got a few more years to cover with that, a few more influential people to get to before we finish the series. Let's see, let me go back, let me go up to the top here, because I'm actually kind of just running with no script, just talking to you guys here. But what am I watching here? What did I write down? I don't know what I said. Oh, I started Ted Lasso again. Yeah. I enjoy it. I watched it the first couple seasons years ago, and I just haven't had a chance to get to it. And I actually started it like a couple months ago. I don't know if just I was in a weird headspace, but I wasn't feeling it. I was like, this is weird, so I just stopped. But I came back. I've watched like 3 or 4 episodes now. It's still just as good as ever. It's interesting to see the players and the characters progress. I like when shows do that, when they don't just keep it stagnant. Let's watch these people go through life if it's going to be a show. But yeah, it's a really good show. Still, the humor is still there. It's still funny. What am I listening to? I don't think I have anything new on that front. I've been listening to a lot of the same stuff. And if you listen to this podcast, I normally listen to. I'm part of the Rogan crew as far as like what I listen to. It's Rogan, Bertcast, Honeydew, Two Bears, stuff like that. So I haven't Tim Dillon. I haven't listened to too much more than that. If anybody has any suggestions, throw them out there. I'm always down to find something new. But as always, if I plug any of those, I can plug my own other episode or episodic podcast is Bite Size Bios. Yeah, so it used to come out. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, we used to do 2 shows a week, and that's wild to me. I can't believe I ever even did that. Also, the episodes were shorter back then, so it did make a little bit more, not sense, but it was easier to do when I was doing 20-minute episodes. I can easily do that. But now with these more long form, which I think is how it's supposed to be, the idea of doing 2 shows a week is just, melts the mind. But yeah, so it's every other Monday we do a bite-sized bio. We pick a person from history and just talk about their lives and kind of give you the elevator pitch of who they are and why they're important in history. And because, of course, as the mini episode accompaniment, we always talk about the last episode. The big thing for me in the last Bite-Sized Bio was the how can I put it, the typo, or I misspoke and said the wrong amount of Cuban exiles, and I couldn't correct it until the next week on Bite-Sized Bios, but I did, and that's what the episode's for, is to try to fix things or add things that I didn't get to say in this episode. Like for this episode, there'll be some extra stuff on the next Bite-Sized Bios, of course, in the beginning. But yeah, then they go up with every, now they've been going with the theme as well from the 40s to 70s. We've been covering a lot of different people. We covered Stalin, we covered Truman, who else we covered? Who else have we covered in this series? That can't be it. Well, I know we have other people coming. Let me see. What do we got? Stalin, Truman. Oh, that is. Yeah, there's like 4 others that are coming, but yeah, there's the only ones we covered. Well, all right. So yeah, check that out. Definitely every Monday, 4:30 a.m. This one actually is coming out a little bit later. I was just actually on the road. Didn't really have time to get this done on the normal time, so I'm hoping not throwing anybody off with the time slots here. But yeah, I don't think there's much else to say before we get to the pod. No. So I hope you guys enjoy the Korean War, man. Check it out.
Our foreign policy is not a political issue. Our foreign policy is not a political issue. It is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of the future of mankind. Remember this. If we do have another world war, it will be an atomic war. We could expect many atomic bombs to be dropped on American cities, and a single one of them could cause many more times the casualties than we have suffered in all the fighting in Korea.
All right, so today we were talking about the Korean War, the war in Korea. And this is a war that I don't know much about. I didn't know much about the Korean War before going into this. I almost actually forgot about it when I was kind of planning the the trajectory of this 40s to 70s kind of theme timeline that we're going through. I was at least 6 or 7 episodes in, and almost pretty much through the 60s when I was like, oh yeah, the Korean War. It happened in the early 50s. We're going to break it down. We're going to find out exactly, well, maybe not exactly, but I would say exactly how it happened. And it has a lot to do with the war before it, World War II. It has a lot to do with that. I didn't know that it had so much to do with that. I really didn't. It makes so much sense because when you think about it, the Korean War happens, I think less than 8 years after World War II. I mean, we go from the largest war probably in the history of humanity, and then a few years later, we are right there. We are right there again. So, the Korean War. Before we get to the Korean War, well, I'll give you a quick overview, and then we're going to go back, as we normally do, and we're going to talk about a small history of Korea, how we got up into the point where the Korean War exists, all that good stuff. But before we do that, give you a quick overview of the Korean War. It was a conflict between the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Republic of Korea. The Democratic People's was the northern side, and the Republic of Korea was the southern side. Over 2.5 million people lost their lives during this war, so it was a pretty, it was a serious war. I think I grew up not always knowing that much about it, so thinking it wasn't that significant. But I mean, if millions of people lose their lives, it's definitely something that's worth your time. The war reached international proportions in June of 1950 when the North, supplied and advised by the Soviets, invaded the South. And so the United Nations, with the United States as the principal participant, would join the war on this side of the South. And so what we'll find as we dig into this is another one of these. That's probably actually the first proxy war of the Cold War. This is one of the first times that the Soviets kind of get to go up against the Americans in the West, right after we've kind of just created this idea of, not quite the Iron Curtain, but the idea of that we are separate. We thought we were all together. We were all in this together in World War II. We were all headed to Berlin together. We were all storming Berlin, trying to get Adolf Hitler together. Now that he's dead, I mean, all hell breaks loose. The only way to put it. I mean, we're just, we're smack dab in the middle of the Cold War. And so, yeah, that happens in early 50s. The president during that time was Dwight D. Eisenhower. Let's see, like I said, it was a proxy war. It happened in Korea. But how did we get here? Okay, how did we get here? So, small history of Korea. I'm not going to go all the way back to the beginning. of like humanity. We'll go back to like the 8th century, like the Bronze Age. We'll kind of start there. What we find, let's see, they found uncovered, pottery that indicates the Bronze Age. Korean people lived on hillsides, in dugouts that were built slightly above ground. Half-moon shaped stone reaping knives and grooved stone axes used for hoeing show that rice farming was practiced. So they were farming rice. And bronze daggers and bronze arrowheads indicate participation in wars of conquest. What I found, and I tried to trace this from the first place I saw it on up until like kind of the last place I could ever find it, is there was a, I'm going to try to get this right. I'm trying to get this right because I don't know much about this. I'm learning about this just like with you guys. It's called the Choson, the CHOSON. There's a little sign above the second O. Kind of looks like a little macaroni noodle. Choson, right? It was the most advanced old state in what is like considered ancient Korea. Now, I think the reason this is important is because as Korea continues on as a society, they keep coming back to this word and this people as one of the foundations of the actual Korean people themselves. But they had been around for about 1,000 years at least, if not more. They were established in the Taedong River basin in the northern part of that peninsula. And according to legend, the son of heaven, Hwanung, descended to earth and married a bear-turned woman who bore a son, Taegun, the founder of Choson. Right? This woman was a bear. Now she's not. Then she had a kid. Right? That's how we get Choson. Perhaps Taegun and his descendants ruled a tribal state in which rituals and politics were not separated. The Choson developed into a league of tribes in the area of the Taedong and the Lao rivers. This is in the 4th century of BC, give or take. About this time, they were using ironware, and this is going back a little bit before what we just talked about, but this is kind of showing you how the Choson became, because I'll tell you, it goes on throughout up until almost modern times, the Choson do. Let's see what we're going to talk about next about these guys. Might be all I have specifically for them right now. Let's see, because we go from there to what is, I would say, commonly known as, let's see, right before, I'm trying to get the times down for you guys so I'm not like jumping you all over the place, because we're going to get to a point where we get to the 1400s forward. But before that, the Koreans had what was called the Three Kingdoms, right? The Three Kingdoms were kind of how Korea was run before we get into the modern times, before we get into like European colonization and anything like that. So the Three Kingdoms evolved into statehood through frequent wars of expansion and centralized military systems as they were organized in training institutions in the Kogoro and, not going to get that word, Hwarangdo, not sure. But basically, throughout years of fighting, throughout the entire basically kind of country of Korea, it had evolved down into what it was basically 3 different kingdoms. Let me see if I can get their actual names here. Okay, so I'm still trying to find the names. Let's say the 3 kingdoms. Okay, here we go. Okay, ready for me to butcher these? These are, I'm sorry for anybody who actually knows how to pronounce these. Goguryeo is Goguryeo, Baekje, Baekje, and then Silla, which is probably not even pronounced Silla, but Silla. And they, like I said, they competed for the hegemony over the Korean peninsula during the ancient period of the Korean kind of history itself. And so that's just a brief overview of like Korea before we get to like the actual 1400s forward, which I do feel is kind of that's because the ancient history of all of these countries and nations is so different than what they would end up being in modern times that speaking about them is good, but it's not always indicative of what they would end up becoming. So let's get to, because what Korea would end up being before it was taken over or kind of controlled by other countries, it was a dynasty. It was a aristocratic kind of lifestyle where they had emperors and things like that. So when the dynasty was established, the territory under its control was named Choson, right, with the approval of the Emperor of China, because before this, China had a very large hand in the control of Korea. Japan would also, as well as we would come to find. And that's what makes it so interesting, or why I think you even see now, like, Korea and China have good relations relatively, is because there's a history between the countries. They've always kind of dealt with each other.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
So the Chosun Dynasty, that's why I brought up the Chosun earlier before, because it's these same people, or the same kind of culture, if you will, that runs through this entire, like a through line of the Korean people. The Chosuns, they were one of the first types of people in Korea. They now have the dynasty itself is kind of controls all of Korea. It's called the Chosun. And so it had 26 monarchs that ruled from 1392 until the Japanese annexation of Korea in 1910. We're going to get there, but that's what Korea was before the 20th century. Because when you get to the 20th century, that's when it gets taken over by Japan, and then we get to the Korean War, and then it becomes its own thing. It gets split in two and becomes something completely different. But up until that point, Korea was one entire entity that was ruled by the Chosun Dynasty. Seoul was the capital, and it was actually called Hanyang during that time. See, they adopted the Confucian ethical system. It replaced Buddhism. The Chosun society was dominated by a hereditary aristocratic class called the Yangban, which literally means two orders, meaning civil and military. Members of the Yangban devoted themselves to the study of Neo-Confucian orthodoxy, and through civil service examinations held public offices, which is pretty much all they did. They were just kind of around, being politicians, being rich people who studied Confucius. They had their own printing. They made a printing press, I think around the early 1200s, movable type printing. So yeah, this isn't really about the history of Korea, but that's, if you've ever wondered, kind of where, they came from. That's a small and albeit incomplete history of that. So now we're going to jump to a little bit further down. We're going to be in the 1800s. Now we're going to talk about the last emperor of Korea. This man's name was Kojong. Right? He was born September the 8th. That's my father's birthday, 1852, in Seoul, Korea, which I believe at the time was still called Hanyang. I could be wrong. But he was the last one. And it's important to mention Kojong, because what you find after Japan takes over Korea, right? They end up running Korea for like 40 years. They take them over in 1910. About like 35. So they have them until they lose the war, until they lose World War II, and they have to give it up. They have to give up all their, their colonies and their resources, and that is literally, I think, in a nutshell, probably truthfully, the reason why the Korean War happened. And I had it put to me very simply in a documentary that I watched. It just makes so much sense. It has to do with Kojong and all these people, but you basically take an entire country who had been existing in an autonomous capacity for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? Different people. China came in there certain times. Japan comes in, right? But then Japan comes in 1910 and occupies them, takes over the country. It's just Japan now. And you find, I don't know if we have the notes in here or not, but Japan was running Korea like a little mini Japan for like 30 years. They didn't run it like, oh, we own you guys, but have your own culture. Do what you want to do. No, they were like book burning. You couldn't write in Korean. You had to learn Japanese. Like, it wasn't a thing. Like, they were like, we're not trying to perpetuate Korean culture, which is why it's a big thing when the last emperor of Korea dies, because that was the culture. The culture died along with him, not just the moment he died, but the family, kind of died out. So there's even once they get their independence, basically, from Japan in 1945, there's nowhere to go. They don't know what to do because their leaders have been dead for 30 years. The last guy who ran Korea died. He dies in 1919. So he dies 10 years into Japanese occupation. 25 years later, they don't have anybody. They're literally running, they're not running scared, but they don't know what to do. They've been given a government that, everyone has a different feeling about what should happen. And that's, people take advantage of that. That's how we end up with two different sides. People have feeling different ways about how to run the government, but it really does start with the last emperor of Korea, Kojong, right? Kojong became the king of Korea while he was still a boy, right? During the first years of his reign, power was in the hands of his father, Taewon-gun. As a regent, his father attempted to restore and revitalize the country. Taewon-gun was kidnapped and taken to China in 1882. So the power passed to dude's mom. Her name was Min. She felt differently. She was actually killed by the Japanese in 1895. So this, the Japanese and the Koreans, man, you find that there's a reason a lot of Japanese and Koreans don't like each other. There's hundreds of years of reasons. So basically, during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, Japan invaded Korea and forced the emperor to sign a treaty allowing the Japanese to use the country as a military base and to place advisors in the government. I mean, that's pretty much, it just spells out the end for Korea right there. After the war, Japan set up a protectorate in Korea. In 1907, the king was forced to abdicate in favor of his son after it came to light that he had dispatched emissaries to plead Korea's case at the Second Hague Convention. So really what we're seeing, I mean, is just slowly but surely, Japan is just taking over Korea. And so then we get to military control by Japan. So this, what I'm about to cover for you right now, is essentially from the 1910s to 1945. It's about 35 years of Japan controlling Korea. Like I said, it wasn't a fun control. This isn't like, like your boss who just lets you work or whatever. This is like helicopter mom, and mom also wants you to do everything she's telling you to do, and you kind of wants you to just be like her. She wants to make a little mini mom, what she wants to do. Japan set up a government in Korea. Was filled up. Basically, the government was basically filled up by all these Japanese generals and admirals. They were appointed by the Japanese emperor. The Koreans were deprived of freedom, of assembly, of association, of press and speech, all of that. Just deprived of all of that. You can say they were oppressed, if you will. Many private schools were closed because they did not meet certain Japanese standards, which are relatively arbitrary. I mean, the Japanese were kind of just making this stuff up, so they would have to close. The colonial authorities used their own school system as a tool for assimilating Korea to Japan, placing primary emphasis on teaching the Japanese language and excluding the educational curriculum such as subjects of Korean language and Korean history. What I'm saying is basically they came in there and said, like I said, you're gonna speak Japanese. We're gonna talk about Japanese stuff. Don't you bring up that Korean stuff. I don't want to hear any Korean. Not even close. Not even K-pop. I don't want to hear any of it. So the Japanese built nationwide transportation and communication networks and established a monetary and financial system. They did all this. They basically came into Korea, who was already, like I said, a functioning government, They have literally a dynasty that's been in control for 600 years, 500 years. Japan comes in like low key, the kind of the same way we took Hawaii, honestly, has them sign everything over, and all of a sudden, Japan's king now. Japan is running things. Obviously, the Koreans didn't like that. Couldn't do much about it. The former emperor Kojong, like I said, he was a symbol of independence throughout this time. Even in the early times, have been like, okay, like we're taken over by Japan, but our emperor's still here. He's still alive. Jogon's still kicking strong. We're gonna take it back sometime. Then he dies. And everybody's like, oh, like we might just be Japanese now. Like it might just be time to just start being Japanese, whatever that means. But that's what that means. And the Koreans would try to have an uprising. They didn't like it. They would do a few protests. They had what's called the March 1st movement. Peaceful demonstrations that were going against, where they were trying to appeal to the Japanese to kind of say, hey, we're not too mad at you guys. We just kind of want to have a little bit of our culture. And Japan was like, no, it's not happening. Sorry. We're going to arrest 47,000 Koreans. And we're going to kill, what do you got? About 7,500 of you guys just for doing so. So no, Japan was not really with that. They weren't really loving that idea. And so now we're going to get into the actual kind of World War II portion of the Korean War, and then kind of slide right into the Korean War. Because really, I mean, the question is how did it happen, not what happened. So we're not going to do a blow-by-blow of what happened in the Korean War. The question, truthfully, is how did the Korean War happen? And I mean, I feel like I've already answered the question, but it's worth it to go through more details. The Korean War really happened because Japan had been running that country for years, and then we just take Japan out, and we just hope that, they'll just figure it out on their own. They'll come to their own conclusion about what's a good government to have, and we'll have no wars, and there won't be any problems. Well, that's not what happened in the history of ever. Never has that happened. It won't happen. You need to have some sort of situation, some sort of system in place to allow for it. Because what we see, and this is what happened, in the Cairo Declaration, which was issued on December the 1st, 1943 by the U.S., Great Britain, and China, they pledged independence for Korea in quote-unquote in due course. Literally. That's like if you said, okay, so I'm going to run that family. I'm going to let that family, or let me have a better, let's say, like if I said, are you going to take a trip tomorrow? I was like, yeah, I'm going to take a trip. Have you prepared for it? Oh, it's going to happen all in due course. Meaning, no, I'm not prepared. I don't really know what's going to happen. Right? Like, it's, we'll figure it out. It's a super vague phrase. And literally, I mean, the people of Korea felt the same way and asked the American government, hey, what does that mean? They asked for interpretation. Their request received no answer at all. At the Yalta Conference in 1945, President Roosevelt proposed to Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin a four-power trusteeship of Korea consisting of the United States, Great Britain, USSR, and China. basically what they would end up doing in Berlin, we saw how well that worked out for them. Basically, they don't have any idea. They never have any idea. They never have any idea what to do with these countries once they take them over. Once they've taken these governments over and gotten rid of whoever's in power, they're just like, oh well, what if we all ran it? What if all four of it? No. Why would that? No. It's no. But evidently Stalin, he agreed to it, only in principle, but they didn't actually reach any formal agreement about it, and that's kind of what left it still being the way it was. Then we have the General Order Number 1, which is a very vague name in itself. It was drafted on August the 11th by the U.S. for Japanese surrender. The terms for Korea in there provided that Japanese forces north of the 38th latitude surrender to the Soviets, and those below it surrender to the Americans. So that is quite literally where we get the beginning of the 38th parallel. And if you know anything about the Korean War, you know that Korea is still divided along that 38th parallel, and it really comes down to the fact of when they did the General Order Number 1. Like they said, the Japanese forces in this area, northern area, they surrendered to the Soviets. The ones in the south surrendered to the Americans. That's where we get it from. And so that wasn't supposed to be like the end. There was supposed to be more to it. But I mean, and I don't know why we continue to trust throughout history these Russians. I don't know why. I really don't. But basically, once they surrendered, the Russians kind of just started to seal off the 38th parallel. Like they were just like, nah, we're good. We're good on that. We're good on. We're going to keep our people. We're going to keep our North Koreans. You keep your South Koreans where they are. Don't you bring over that parallel. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. And so actually, I have here a small little bit. And this I found this interesting of how Kim Jong-il came to, or the Kim family. I don't think it's Kim Jong-il. It's the one before his father. How he came to power. Kim Il-sung came to power in North Korea, and it's right around this exact time of when we're
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
When they're splitting up, because basically Kim Il-sung had been a member of the resistance in Korea. They're these Marxist revolutionaries, right, who had fought against the Japanese as part of the Chinese-dominated guerrilla armies in Manchuria and China. So these people were fighting against Japan so that they could have, a Marxist Korea, basically. And one of these exiles was a minor but successful guerrilla named Kim Il-sung, and he received some training in Russia and had been a major in the Soviet army. And once all this happens, once the Japanese surrender to the Soviets, and then the Soviets are trying to figure out, what they're going to do with the government that they are now trying to have control over, they use Kim Il-sung, and they prop him up as a hero from his efforts when he was fighting with the Chinese against the Japanese, and he kind of becomes the figurehead for the new North Korean government. And that's I think what is that, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, I believe it is. It's just, you always wonder. I don't know. It's interesting. All right, and so before we get to the actual war, I wanted to cover just briefly what it was like in both the north and the southern zones, just to kind of understand the differences and see what these people were going through before they got to the actual the fighting part. So the southern zone. Start with that first. And like I was saying earlier, the end of Japanese rule caused political confusion among Koreans in the entire country. You had taken from them what had been, for some of them people, it's all they ever knew. We're talking 35 plus years of occupation. So if you're 30 years old, all you know is Japanese occupation. You don't even really know what it means to have autonomy or fight for or have independence or anything like that. So because of that, various political groups, kind of sprang up all over the place. Although they were roughly divided into rightists, leftists, middle of the roaders, they had a common goal, which was the immediate attainment of self-government. As early as 1945, August 16th, some Koreans organized a committee for the preparation of Korean independence, headed by Woon Lyuh. How do you pronounce? I mean, it just looks like Lyuh. It's probably not that at all, but that's what it looks like to me. And he was closely associated with the leftists. So this is kind of the beginning of their government. And but from what I understand, it was different. It's similar, but not the same to like Berlin, as one side was run in a Soviet manner, the northern side, and then the southern side was run in a more Western way. So the U.S. policy in Korea was to establish a trusteeship that would supersede both the American and Soviet occupation forces in Korea. So their idea was to kind of let this, let's create something that would then supersede both of our, participation in an effort to get back their country in a way that we got it, which was, the whole one. Let's see. So, by 1948, the goal of the UN was to create an independent South Korea, since they realized that Russia was not really going to play ball with the unification of the country. Let's see. So, we'll get to talk about the northern side. So, unlike the U.S. forces in the South, the Soviet army marched into the North in 1945. They were accompanied by a band of expatriate Korean communists. So they came with Koreans with them, which is different than what the Americans did. I mean, they're playing different ball. And I think one of them, like I said, was Kim Il-sung. He was one of the people that came into, if I have my information correctly, he was one of the people that came into North Korea and helped to kind of bring them back to life. By placing these Korean expatriates in positions of power, the Soviet Union easily set up a communist-controlled government in the North because people were, they were like, oh yeah, we like these guys. They look like us. They are us. So this was also, eventually he would come to power through this. Let's see if there's anything else I really want to say about the North before we get into it. Like I said, Kim Il-sung was a major in the Red Army during this time. He was eventually elected the first secretary of the Korean Central Bureau of the Communist Party. Like I said, he would go on to father basically all of the same leaders. They're all Kims, and same bloodline now. All right, so let's get to it. Let's get to the Korean War. All right, we talked about it. We talked about the beginnings. We talked about Korea. We've talked about a lot of stuff, but let's talk about the war. So the war broke out on June 25th, 1950. Right, and this is when North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. North Korean leader Kim Il-sung launched the attack once he had received a promise of support from Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Remember, we covered him on the last week's bite-sized bio. In January 1950, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson had delivered a speech in which he said South Korea and Taiwan were not part of the American defensive perimeter, quote-unquote, which seemed to indicate the U.S. would keep out of a Korean conflict. This is what gave them the idea that if we come over the 38th parallel, we can maybe take the rest of Korea for ourselves. Well, they would find out that is not the case. While the U.S. Strategic Air Command was well prepared to launch an all-out attack against the Soviet Union, it was less clear how it could use atomic weapons in a limited conflict like Korea. Now, if you listened to this podcast, I've covered, I think in multiple of the past episodes, we don't even realize how close we all have come to being blown up throughout the years. I mean, the amount of presidents who wanted to, and it goes without saying, Trump wanted to nuke somebody. At least once a month, if not once a week, he just brought up the idea for anything, probably anything. We have problems with, China or, some random country in South America. He's like, well, I mean, we got those small nukes, right? They just, we got the baby nukes. We could drop a baby nuke. You probably make it up, but there's no such thing as a baby nuke. You're gonna baby atomic bomb somebody. But yeah, the amount of times that presidents throughout the years, I mean, literally like I said, I think it was in, I'm not sure why it came up, but I think it was, it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah, it was during the last episode. I think I said, because I've seen it mentioned, in documentaries. Eisenhower had no plan for communism. Eisenhower didn't know what to do with communism. He left there, and I mean, we're still fighting it to a degree now, but not in the capacity that we were then. But his idea that he gave to JFK when he left was, how about, we could just bomb them. We could just blow them all up. We just take that right off the map, just erase it, That's how we do that. That was his plan, to kill millions of people in the name of, I guess, democracy. I'm not sure. But so I take that just to go back and say, like, they even thought about trying to use the atomic bomb in Korea. I mean, we'd look back now and in hindsight and know that it's only been used once or twice on people, but one actual, war. Could you imagine? I couldn't imagine if we actually had it used somewhere else. Back to the Korean War. So on August the 1st, 1950, the decision was made to send the 9th Bomb Wing to Guam as an atomic force 10 B-29s loaded with unarmed atomic bombs set out for the Pacific. On August the 5th, one of the planes crashed during a takeoff from Fairfield Suisun Air Force Base near San Francisco, killed a dozen people, and scattered the mildly radioactive uranium of the bomb's tamper around the airfield. I'm not sure what a tamper is, but I'm guessing that's just all the stuff that it had. So the rest of them got there. They didn't explode. They never ended up using them. At a press conference on November the 30th, President Truman confirmed that he had been actively considering using atomic bombs in Korea since the beginning of the war. He's obviously, the only person that ever do it, and he was thinking about doing it again. Dude from Britain came over and was like, "Yo, can you please chill with that? Speak, bro. That's not cool beans. We're not. No one's trying to have you blow up more Asian people, bro. Can we? That's not a good look." But yeah, so then when we get to that, at first the North Koreans made rapid progress throughout South Korea, and they quickly took the Korean capital of Seoul, drove back the South Korean and American troops back to the southern part of Busan. Isn't that called Burma now? Isn't Busan Burma? Am I wrong? I think it is. General Douglas MacArthur managed to hold him off after the Waigwan Bridge. Let's see, over the Nekdon River was blown up. The Waigwan Bridge was blown up on August the 3rd. UN forces then began to resupply and fortify their position with a defensive perimeter. The first British troops landed at Busan soon after, so we brought in all the guys, all the dogs, as Drake would say. Once the British guys got there, they were immediately sent to the Battle of Nakdong on the western part of Busan. I think I was saying the UN helped them on the other side of that. I'm not 100% sure. Let's see. So yeah, they would kind of go back and forth there. Say about 30,000, I think, by this time in 1950 to 51 had lost their lives. Like I said, it would end up being 2.5 million overall. I'm not sure if there's much else to say specifically about the battles, because we could talk battles, but I don't think that's that interesting as far as to make for content. I definitely would, people lost their lives and it's stuff you don't want to just gloss over stuff like that. These are full on people that are doing this stuff, and war is just, it is monstrous. And I've never been, but I just from seeing it and just from hearing people that talk about it, it sounds supremely god awful. Let's see. Anything else I want to say? I'm trying to find, because what also interested me, and we won't talk about this, is that this is happening in the 50s. This is the beginning of Eisenhower's 50s. The nuclear family is coming in full force to America, to a neighborhood near you. This is before white flight, or I think right before white flight. So the white people are just filling up suburbs to the hilt. Just green lawns as far as the eye can see. And this is the topic of conversation at the dinner table, is the Korean War. We haven't gotten to Vietnam yet. We haven't put anybody on the moon. We're not even 100% sure. Get this. Because truthfully, like I said, we're not even 100% sure Hitler's dead. It's a foregone conclusion now. But you think about it. You think back. I didn't realize, because that's another part, another layer of this Cold War. Another reason for the distrust of the Soviets is, they've always kept this stuff close to the vest. They wouldn't come out and say that Hitler was fully dead until the mid to late 60s, I believe it is. At 67, I don't know. Check the facts. I mentioned it a couple episodes ago, because like I said, the moment that Stalin came into Berlin, he was like, all he wanted to do was just sow seeds of confusion. All he wanted to do was just have control and have nobody else really know what's going on. And so they took Hitler's body and we're like, we don't know where it's at. What Hitler? What Hitler? What Hitler? Adolf? No. But yeah, that's all that to say. Just this stuff, man. It's deeper. It's so deep. But I have a quick timeline of the Korean War, and then we might be just about done. Really, I do want to mention that China got involved in the Korean War. It's worth mentioning. I think I'll talk about the negotiations. Okay, we'll talk about the POWs. That's what we're talking about. So I'm going to give you the timeline. We're going to cover a couple of those things, and then we're going to get out of here, folks. Let's go back. Let me go back up here to a lot of scrolling. 50s timeline of North Korea. So like I said, June 25th, right? 1950, the war starts. North Korea invades South Korea via the 38th parallel. June 27th, the UN Security Council Resolution 83 is declared North Korea. They declared North Korean actions constituted a breach of peace, meaning they kind of just they stepped over the line. Let's see. From August 4th to September the 16th, the U.S. and South Korean troops established the Busan perimeter and prevented North Korea from capturing South Korea. Where we are, we're going to jump a little bit through here. We're in the next year. January of 1951, Chinese People's Volunteer Army. The names they make up for these things, man. Like, what is going on? Chinese People's Volunteer Army? What? All right, so they pushed the UN forces back across the 38th parallel, and they recaptured Seoul. That was in January of 1951. Let's see here. Yeah, July 10th, 1951. The peace talks begin and are eventually continued at Panmunjom. 1953, the armistice agreement was signed at Panmunjom, which temporarily ended all fighting. A permanent peace treaty was never signed. Has still not been signed, and technically both sides are still at war. That's why you can't, there's not a lot of going back and forth for people in Korea. You kind of just pick a Korea and you keep that Korea. You're born in a blood neighborhood, you just stay a blood, you don't get to go crippin', whenever you want. You have to keep it CK all day, son. You know what I mean? But they still do that. They're still at war. So let's get down to what else we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the POWs, because to me, that was always the more interesting part of war, was the POWs. I read books about POWs when I was a kid, about Vietnamese or like the Vietnam War POWs, and it's really messed up only because of the atrocities that are usually committed to them. I mean, it's why I had immense respect for Senator McCain, because of what I know he went through. I could not, or I couldn't even imagine if I could. He was one of those guys. Not in this war, obviously. He was in the Vietnam War, but was put in one of those the bamboo cages. That's one of my fears in life. I don't want to just. I guess we're going to go there. We're going to take it deep this week on HTTH. Tell you about my fears. Is to be in a small box that I can't stand up in. Scares me sometimes out of my sleep. It's just something that I just want to wake up and make sure I can still stand up. Just make sure I got that freedom. I couldn't. I'd freak out. I would think my friend. That's what he did. He did it for I forget how long. That's why he couldn't raise his arms above his shoulders, because of being stuck in a box for I don't even know how long. Let's find out. We got the internet at our fingertips. How long was Senator McCain a POW? Let's see. We should definitely talk about this, because he was freed in 1972, so this may come up. But let's see. How long was he tortured? How long? Shot down. 5 years. 5 years, man. That's wild. And he's from 31 to 36. I'm 32. I don't think I could do it. So my hat's off to you, sir. Rest in peace. We're getting back. We're getting off track here. Let's get back to what we're doing. We're talking about the POWs of the Korean War, though. All right. So that's. Let me get to my notes here. The big thing I think with this was that neither side seemed to be that forthcoming or truthful in divulging the numbers of POWs that they actually have in their control that were actually detained. The initial assumption by negotiators was that they would follow the revised Geneva Convention of 1949, which required, quote unquote, the detaining authority that held POWs to return all of them to their homelands as rapidly as possible when the war was over. Now, we must say also that the war was never actually over, but I don't think that may have been a problem. I don't know. This all-for-all policy of a complete, even forced exchange of prisoners was certainly favored by the U.S., because they were alarmed by the early reports of the atrocities committed against American POWs by the North Koreans. The South Korean government, on the other hand, was adamantly opposed to complete involuntary repatriation, since it knew that thousands of detainees in the South were actually South Korean citizens who have been forced to fight with the KPA. So basically, there was just, nobody was being just straight with anybody. I don't know. This is weird. So both sides agreed to exchange names of the POWs and the numbers held in various categories, and the results of the tally were they shocked both parties. So the U.S. Armed Forces were carrying 11,500 men as MIA, right? But the communists only reported about 3,000 actual POWs, which meant that's about a 8,000 to 9,000 person discrepancy. as far as for the South Koreans, they were estimated to have 88,000 MIAs, and they only got back about 7,000. So that's the numbers. We're talking like basically saying, oh, we're missing 80,000 guys. And like, oh, we got like 7,000. So, oh, where are the other 81,000 of them? Because these are our missing. These aren't even we got the ones we know are dead. We got the KIAs. But what about the MIAs? Where do the other 81,000 MIAs go? But what they're saying, from what I'm reading, is that I guess that they're thinking that some of the MIAs actually had died in battle, and that just, put them over as KIAs, and they just hadn't been found yet. But yeah, that's pretty much the Korean POW. That's the information I think I wanted you to have. Let's see, I want to cover one or two more things. I really wanted to know the aftermath and the full death toll of the Korean War, and then we're going to go ahead and get out of here. We don't have much else to talk about today, this week. We have much more to cover in this 40s to 70s theme that we have, and I think we just added one more thing, man. We're going to be talking about, I just spaced, was in the 70s. Oh God, it's gone. Oh no, I don't remember. We were just talking about it. Oh, Senator McCain. We're going to be talking about the Vietnam War and probably the POWs of Vietnam, because that stuff is wild. So let's see. So they're saying like 5 million people. 5 million people died. That's including civilians. And more than half of these, were civilians. They're saying 40,000 Americans, 100,000 wounded. So not bad on the I mean, it's hard to say 40,000 people say not bad. I just mean in comparison to the other millions of Koreans that died during this war. Came out on the lighter side of it. They say about 180,000 Chinese people died in the Korean War. And so what we were left with after the war, because that's still technically going, was what's called the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. And that's just the part in the middle where nobody can go because they still haven't decided to be a unified Korea. And if you're wondering, the last person to actually die, last American to die due to hostile action in Korea was 1994, not too long ago. His name was David Hillemon, and he was killed when his helicopter was shot down over North Korea. So yeah, not much more to mention about Korea, the Korean War. We got North Korea, we got South Korea. The war's still going on, kind of. We got the DMZ. Like I said, someone was just killed in the last 30 years in a war that's supposed to have been over 50, 70 years ago. But yeah, that's been the Korean War. All right, so that was the Korean War. Hope you guys liked it. Pretty good episode of How Did That Happen. I really didn't know much about the Korean War at all before I went into this. Know a lot. I think it can really be summed up in the same way that so many, if you really think about it, in these last, in this theme, in the 20th century for sure, so we can go back to World War I as well, from what I'm about to say, but there's so many times in history in this 20th century where we just left a government, we left the country like disenfranchised and having no way of providing for themselves or governing themselves. We did that. That's what happened in Germany in the first, war afterwards, and that's what happens in Vietnam. That's what happens in Korea. It happened in Berlin and in Germany. We did it so many times. You would think at some point people would learn. They would really learn. Like, hey, we can't just come in here. I mean, we did the same thing in the Middle East. There's got to be a better script for, I'm not even sure what you call it. I mean, for rebirthing a nation. I mean, it's because it doesn't work time and time again. And that's what you see here. That's all you see is because, Japan was running into Korea, and then we take over Japan and we make Japan give up Korea, and Korea just kind of, with no structure, just falls to the floor. And then people are scattered and left to just fend for themselves and find their own government while also being influenced by either side, the West and the USSR, and that's what you get. I mean, we're not going to relitigate it now in the post part, but that's what that's the Korean War. Hope you guys liked it. What do we got? We got who's coming up next? We got a few people being covered for the BSBs. So many of them. I'm gonna try to work some women in here for the 60s and the 50s and 60s, because we've done a lot of dudes, and I was trying to keep it pretty even, but when you're talking about these wars and politics, and during this time, there weren't as many female politicians, so it's a lot easier. It's just easier to, you find yourself always talking about guys when, I can do some work, and I'm gonna find some prominent women during this time. We have already covered Jackie O on the BSB way back, like 30 episodes ago. So if you want to go back and listen to that, as if it's somewhat involved in this theme, do that for sure. But yeah, we got more coming. I do think I'm going to keep going in order as I've kind of been going. We covered World War II. We covered the Berlin Wall, which actually, the Berlin Wall actually hasn't even gone up yet in this time, because it's not. We're talking about the Korean War right now. It would actually come like 8 years later, but I'm going to keep going kind of in order of, of these events. So the next thing coming up will be, I'm not sure, we'll probably cover something in Eisenhower's government, and then we'll get up to Kennedy. But yeah, thank you guys for coming back week to week and press and play. I really do appreciate it. I'm gonna keep trying to mixing things up and keep the podcast, new, and because we're coming up on 2 years. It'll be 2 years in January. This podcast has been going, so we want to keep it, kind of progressing and always kind of keep things changing up. But yeah, before I start rambling too much, thank you guys for pressing play, and give us 5 stars wherever you find this. 2 stars if you didn't like it. Tell us why you didn't like it, because constructive criticism is always welcome. I'll see you guys next week with the next bite-sized bios.
Okay, round 2. Name something that's not boring.
A laundry? Ooh, a book club. Computer solitaire, huh?
Ah, sorry, we were looking for Chumba Casino. That's right, ChumbaCasino.com has over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+ terms and conditions apply. See website for details.